Hello, my name is Jeremiah Liu. My presentation is titled Dropout Patterns and Performance Disparities in U.S. Youth Fencing. This work examines when athletes in U.S. fencing are most likely to leave the sport, whether those patterns differ by weapon and gender, and whether dropout is associated with lower competitive performance. More specifically, I analyzed competition histories from USA fencing records to understand how dropout is distributed across age and how athletes would discontinue compared with age-matched active fencers in terms of win ratio. The main message I want to leave you with is that dropout in U.S. fencing is concentrated during adolescence, especially around ages 15 to 18, and that athletes who quit generally show lower competitive performance than those who remain active. Youth sport is widely recognized as important for children's physical, psychological, and social development. However, at the same time, dropout from organized sport is a major concern, especially during adolescence. Fencing is especially interesting because it differs from many other youth team sports. It is an individual, one-on-one sport. It is divided into three weapons, foil, epee, and saber, and it often requires substantial travel, coaching, equipment investment, and long-term technical development. These features may shape retention differently than in team sports, but fencing has received much less research attention than sports like soccer, basketball, swimming, or gymnastics. So the key question in the study is, when do athletes leave fencing and is dropout linked to lower performance? That question matters because if we know when athletes are most vulnerable and which athletes are at higher risk, then retention efforts can be better targeted. This aims to address the following questions. The first question is, when does dropout peak in U.S. fencing? And the second question is, does it differ by weapon and by sex? The third question is dropout associated with lower performance? To answer these three questions, I analyzed over 13,000 athletes using USA fencing-based records with competition histories from 2017 to 2025. Because some athletes competed in more than one weapon, each athlete was assigned a primary weapon based on the one in which they fenced most frequently. Performance was measured using annual win ratio, which is bouts won divided by bouts fenced in that year. For discontinued athletes, dropout was defined as the final age at which they recorded sanctioned competitive activity. The hypothesis was that dropout would peak during adolescence and that athletes who quit would have lower win ratios than active peers of the same age. This figure shows the composition of the cohort by age in 2025 across the three weapons. What is important here is not dropout yet, but simply who is in the data set. The cohort is concentrated in the teen years, with the largest numbers generally between the mid-teens and late teens. Male counts are higher than female counts at nearly every age across all three weapons, and foil is the largest subgroup overall. After the late teen years, participation declined steadily into adulthood. So this slide is mainly giving context for the sample. It shows that the data set is weighted toward the teenage years, which is useful background before we look at actual dropout patterns. This is the first main results slide. Here I am showing age-specific quit fractions by weapon and gender. These are fractions, not counts, so they reflect the risk of dropout at each age rather than just the number of athletes. Across all three weapons, quit fractions rise during adolescence, with the clearest dropout window between ages 15 and 18. Foil shows a clear increase during the teen years, epee is lower and flatter overall, and saber shows some of the strongest increases, especially among females. Some of the larger fluctuations at older ages should be interpreted cautiously because sample sizes are much smaller there, as shown on the previous slide. Overall, this figure shows that dropout in U.S. fencing is not evenly distributed across age. It is concentrated in adolescence, especially between 15 and 18. This figure shifts from dropout timing to competitive performance. The main comparison here is between active athletes and athletes who discontinued at a given age. The higher curves represent the active population, and the lower curves represent the athletes who discontinued at that age. Across the age range, active athletes generally show higher mean win ratios than those who quit. The population mean win ratios also tend to increase with age, especially among males, while the quitter groups remain consistently lower. So the main message from the figure is that athletes who discontinue are, on average, underperforming relative to age-matched active fencers. This suggests that dropout is associated not only with age, but also with competitive performance. This slide focuses specifically on foil. At each age, the mean win ratio of athletes who quit is compared with the mean win ratio of all active foil fencers of the same age and gender. The key pattern is that quitters generally show lower win ratios than active peers. That gap is visible across much of the age range and is particularly meaningful during adolescence, which is also where dropout risk is rising. So in foil, poor competitive performance appears to be associated with discontinuation. The error bars widen at older ages, which reflects the fact that relatively few athletes remain in the sample at those ages. Now for epic. The same overall pattern is still present here. Athletes who quit generally show lower win ratios than active fencers of the same age and gender. However, compared with foil and saber, the gap in epee appears smaller and less consistent. One possible explanation is that outcomes in epee may feel less decisive because double touches are allowed. That may reduce the discouragement associated with losing and make performance differences feel less absolute than in foil or saber. So the relationship between lower performance and dropout is still present in epee, but appears weaker than in the other two weapons. This slide shows the saber results. The same general pattern is present here, but it is stronger. Athletes who quit tend to have lower win ratios than active fencers of the same age and gender, and the gap is especially noticeable among females. So compared with the other weapons, saber appears to show one of the strongest links between lower performance and dropout. A possible explanation is that saber uses right of way, so results may feel more decisive and performance differences more obvious. That may make setbacks harder to absorb, especially during adolescence. And as before, the larger fluctuations at older ages should be interpreted carefully, since the sample sizes are much smaller there. To conclude, this study shows that dropout in U.S. fencing is concentrated in adolescence, with the clearest risk window around ages 15 and 18. Athletes who discontinue competition consistently show lower win ratios in the age-matched active population. The performance gap is generally larger for females than for males, and the strongest vulnerability appears among female fencers in foil and saber during adolescence. Weapon-specific differences are also evident. Epee shows smaller performance gaps, while foil and saber generally show stronger performance-linked dropout patterns. Taken together, these findings suggest that retention efforts should prioritize adolescent fencers, especially lower-performing athletes and female athletes, and should also consider weapon-specific strategies and broader participation pathways in general. Thank you so much for your attention.